Witnesses say the plane catapulted 3 or 4 times as it rumbled down the runway before it
was conscious the entire time, holding on and waiting for the thing to stop.
Interested in 4 separate pieces, partially inverted, some of it underwater.
A hellish scene. Police and firemen found survivors scrambling up muddy banks.
Riders had to put ladders on the berm to make makeshift awkward stairways to get up and down both sides.
Type of anguish that he might have been in because he just simply couldn't get out. He couldn't get free.
Where I was sitting, the plane had cracked open like an egg.
"31 years ago, a flight from New York City headed to Cleveland, Ohio, never made it to the final destination. A day that will forever impact those that survived and those that lost so much. It's a story of loss, but also a story of change. You see, this plane tragedy, it changed the future of aviation safety. We remember U.S. Air Flight 405, 30 seconds to disaster. March 22nd, 1992. It's a cold, early spring evening with below freezing temperatures and wet snow on the ground when the unimaginable happened.
Witnesses say the plane catapulted 3 or 4 times as it rumbled down the runway before it hit the water.
U.S. Airways Flight 405 took off for Cleveland, Ohio, but crashed right after takeoff from New York's LaGuardia Airport. 30 seconds to disaster.
The left wing probably struck the runway, and then the pilot lost control of the plane. I was conscious the entire time, holding on and waiting for the thing to stop.
The Dutch-made airliner, a Fokker F-28, had partially landed onto Flushing Bay. For those that survived, the details still too vivid, even 31 years later.
I was at a convention in New York for my business in a hotel in Jersey. My flight was about 8 o'clock. Why I flew out of LaGuardia, I can't remember, because normally I fly out of Newark.
U.S. Air 405 passenger Bart Simon was returning to Cleveland after a business trip.
It was starting to snow, so I wasn't sure what was going to go on, but other planes were de-icing, and so there was a backup.
The flight had been delayed for almost 2 hours before getting clearance to take off.
Back in the early 90s, the airlines would just keep operating with delays and just kind of roll through it. So there's a lot of backup through the aircraft system of delays, all the snow issues, not just LaGuardia, but the entire region.
The mix of winter-like weather conditions and operating protocols at the time proved to be costly.
Snow was coming down a little bit. The temperature was about 30 to 31 degrees, so any moisture that touched those wings were likely to turn to ice. A vehicle broke down in front of the aircraft and prevented it from leaving the alleyway for about 20 minutes.
51 souls were on board that plane that fateful day. Catastrophe striking shortly after departing and in the darkness of the night.
Get on,
Right.
You go up. Was there a moment that you thought, this doesn't sound good?
It all happened within probably 30 or 35 seconds. There was no time to be scared. It just happened, just like that. When you thought you were going to go into the air, you didn't go into the air.
U.S. Air 405 de-icing is completed one last time at 9 o'clock. At 9:07 p.m., the pilot announces 7 other planes are ahead, awaiting takeoff. 26 minutes later, the plane is number 1 for departure. U.S. Air 405 speeds down runway 13, attempting to take off. Seconds later, a first impact. A second later, another impact. The plane steers off runway 13, coming to a stop partially submerged in Flushing Bay. Small fires are reported. Chaos ensues with passengers trapped underwater, still wearing their seatbelts. About 4 minutes later, first responders arrive at the scene.
Divers braved 38-degree water and jagged metal to enter the submerged fuselage, where many died strapped into their seats.
Reaching the crash site proves to be challenging, slush covering LaGuardia's infamous runway 13.
The aircraft came to rest in 4 separate pieces, some of it partially inverted, and there was a huge explosion, creating a big mushroom cloud at that time. Once the mushroom cloud dissipated, there were a few fires both inside and outside of the aircraft. By the time the fire trucks showed up, the airline workers had already pulled a few people out of the wreckage. For the passengers on that aircraft, some of them died on impact.
Rescuers desperately looking for survivors using flashlights and trying to make their way over to a berm where some of the wreckage came to rest.
It was a hellish scene. Police and firemen found survivors scrambling up muddy banks.
It is a race against time and freezing temperatures.
The berm was incredibly slippery. Firefighters had to put ladders on the berm to make makeshift awkward stairways to get up and down both sides. And there were some people who were simply conscious but unable to get their seatbelts off. Being underwater, upside down, after that traumatic event, you are incredibly disoriented.
The plane had practically dismantled in a matter of seconds.
So I was sort of sideways on the floor looking at the window, but I was able to unfasten my seat belt. I pushed the seat back from me. I was able to stand up, and the entire side of the plane was gone.
Simon's survival instincts kicking in right away.
I got knocked out, I think, for about 10 or 15 seconds. I smacked my head into the into the back of the seat in front of me, you know, where the tray table comes out. I was on my side in the chair, and I was looking at the window. And I remember I started banging it with my fist, like I was going to knock it out. It was just a reflex. And then I said, this is not going to work.
Just a few seconds of panic before he was one of the lucky ones. He was able to unbuckle his seatbelt.
Somehow my seat remained attached to the floor. And my seatbelt also held. So I was not thrown out. But I do remember seeing in the dim light a couple of people in their seats floating in the water. The plane had cracked open like an egg. I didn't know where I was. I mean, I ran out, and it turned out I was running into the Flushing Bay. I was running into the water, and I tripped and fell in, and it was about 28 degrees. So now I'm covered with water and freezing, but at least I'm out.
In the shock of it all, Simon recalls hiking up the rock barrier on the edge of the tarmac and the water, his pants soaked and smelling of jet fuel.
I was so cold and I was shaking, and the plane is on fire. I see the tail, and it felt kind of nice because I could feel the heat from it, and it felt warm. So I started to sort of go over towards the thing, and I said, bad idea.
27 souls would never make it home to their families, including 2 members of the crew. Questions immediately arising in the aftermath to investigate what kept the Dutch airliner from taking off.
U.S. Air said today Flight 405 was de-iced twice, but half an hour went by between the last de-icing and takeoff, and safety board investigators today are suspicious.
The NTSB launched an investigation into the events. The report revealed several probable causes, including failure of the FAA to provide flight crews with procedures, requirements, and criteria in weather that required de-icing procedures. The flight crew also attempted to take off without verifying the wings did not have ice on them. They had been de-iced twice, but the takeoff delays caused ice to unsafely accumulate. And there was a last contributing factor, quote, inadequate coordination by the crew upon takeoff. The captain operating the aircraft that night, calling out commands or speeds as that flight was racing down the runway.
V1, which is also known as decision speed. If an engine were to fail, that flight is committed to taking off on the remaining engine or engines. If they had tried to abort at that point, they wouldn't have enough runway left to be able to stop. VR, or rotation speed. Rotation speed means that the flying pilot would pull back on the yoke, the nose would go up, and then the aircraft would finally take flight. Typically, V1 and rotate would be called right behind each other.
But the plane faced trouble while attempting to lift off.
Usually the V1 speed is based on weather conditions, the weight of that aircraft at that particular time, but the captain chose a lower one just to make sure that if anything had happened, that they would have enough runway to be able to stop on this snowy night.
In the cockpit, a communications mix-up further sealed the aircraft's fate.
The first officer said V1 and rotate. Because the pilot said it back to back, the captain rotated a little earlier than they should have, not quite at that preferred speed for their departure. This, compiled with the fact that ice had actually built up on the wing, made the aircraft take off just a couple dozen feet off the ground and then start to stall out.
The NTSB probe would ultimately change the aviation industry and de-icing protocols.
Aviation safety has come a long, long ways since 30 years ago. You know, the fortunate thing, we hope that lessons are learned from an airplane crash disaster, from the investigation that's done, to the experts that are consulted, to the deep dive that we as lawyers and advocates do for our clients. Hope that it's more than just the remedy for the client, but it's about preventing a future disaster like this from occurring again.
One of the survivors of U.S. Air Flight 405 asked the question, why was I spared when others were not? It's a really difficult question because there isn't an answer. For Bart Simon, he tells a story of living his life after that crash, how he made it off the plane, into the water, and eventually back to his wife and little girls. For others, it was a very different story. The past, at times, remains partially intact.
I unzippered this huge bag, and inside was my luggage, still soaked in jet fuel, and this briefcase.
This briefcase, the same one Bart Simon took aboard US Air 405, a reminder of the day he was gifted a second chance.
There was a ticket, 2 tickets that I bought for Broadway for Cats. I went back to New York with these tickets and saw the shows.
More than 3 decades later, Simon has gone on to live a full life, but he still has a hard time explaining to himself how he survived a plane crash.
I didn't really find out until this morning that, you know, the husband and wife who were sitting next to me, you know, did not survive. And that's a difficult thing to comprehend, you know, why you're spared and why they're not.
Dr. David Porcelli and his wife Karen never made it to their destination, their home in Lyndhurst, Ohio. 31 years ago, Simon spoke about the same couple he chatted with at takeoff. A week after that, he'd find himself attending their funeral.
I didn't really know them, but I just felt like maybe it was the right thing to do. And the most difficult part, I think, was seeing their parents. Can you imagine being a parent? And here I come walking in okay, and their 2 children are dead.
His assigned seat, 4F, likely the reason he's sitting down today. The difference between life and death.
Here's the bizarre thing. I'm in the window. You know, you've got D and E and F. The 2 people in D and E died. It's hard to comprehend that the 2 people sitting, you know, a few inches apart, 2 are gone, 1's still here. I mean, there's no figuring that out.
For Deborah Holder, the void is still there today.
This is his wedding band. Oh. Yeah.
She has continued to live with it every day after losing her husband of 14 years.
It's quite a journey, not as painful as, you know, the actual incident in the early years, but it still pulls on your heartstring. Still memories that give you pause, make you think, make you reflect.
Holder and her 3 kids would never get the chance to tightly hold their beloved Cyrus just one last time.
I don't think I stopped smiling the whole day. Because I was happy. I was in love, and I was ready to say, I do until death do us part. Not knowing that not too many years after that, it would happen.
For the children, the loss was profound. Their oldest, Lucinda, remembers her dad as a gentle soul.
He was like my hero. He would always give me advice.
His Caribbean roots very much reflecting who he was.
We started dating and seeing each other, but he was from Barbados. and he had a heavy accent. And it was about 2 weeks before I understood what he was telling me his name was. I didn't know what he was saying. It's embarrassing, but it's the truth.
I just remember the food and everything. He was a great cook.
He played cricket. He had a team, a little ragtag team with some of his friends. They played cricket on the weekends, and he would take the kids. That was our family time together there in the park.
Returning to the home they had known without Cyrus was devastating. Instead, choosing to stay with her mother for a few weeks.
Just stayed at her house. Me and the kids just stayed at her house. And then I said, you got to go home. You have a home. And I decided to go first by myself. And when I went home and I pulled up in the driveway and I got out of the car, but all I could do was stand in the driveway and just bawl, because I had to get myself together in order to put the key in the door and to go in the house that he no longer was going to be in.
Does it feel like 30 years?
Yes and no. You get to a place where you move forward in your grief, but there's still a part of you that's stuck in the past, in grief. I still shed tears. I still dream about him.
You do?
Often, yes. I still dream about him. Last week, I dreamed about him. He was just there.
Even after death, she keeps collecting memories of her late husband, but she is still troubled by his last moments on board US Air 405.
It comes up in my mind at times, and to think about the anguish and the frightening way his mind must have been racing at that time, and not being able to do anything about it, not being able to be free, not being able to come out of this thing alive. What killed him was he drowned because the part of the plane that he was in went underwater and he couldn't get out of his seat.
Several families, including Deborah's, would go on to settle with US Air over the crash.
You find that people are in a state of shock. It's an emotional anguish filled with sorrow and grief and a large sense of loss. You not only have to be an advocate for their rights, protecting their rights, and vigorously pursuing the remedies that are available to them under the law, but you also have to be empathetic.
2 years later, a judge from the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Ohio would find the now defunct US Air liable for the crash.
There have been very, very few cases since US Air 405 where a plane has gone down due to the lack of de-icing or the improper de-icing materials. The longevity of the effectiveness of the de-icing fluid is much greater today than it is 30 years ago.
That has not stopped Simon from doing his fair share of flying, and it didn't stop him the day after the crash, having to jump on another plane to get home to his family.
I got onto US Air and flew back this afternoon. I figured it wasn't going to happen again.
The weather conditions had improved since the night before, but looking out the window, there was a reminder still present.
As we're going down the runway, I'm looking out the window and there's all the wreckage and the debris from the night before.
After a life well lived, he now looks forward to stopping by his daughter's house and seeing his grandkids.
All these people in my life who I never would have had a chance to be with. I get to see the kids every day, get to see their great dog every day. Life has been good. I have no regrets. Life has been great for me. I mean, I had a good business, made a nice living, enjoyed good health for the most part.
Bart was in his early 40s when the crash happened, the same age as his daughter Michelle today.
So to be sitting here at that same age and knowing that I have 2 young children and that could have been gone in an instant for him, oof, that's a lot.
Her dad's journey helps put life into perspective.
I've always been grateful for life anyway. I don't know if I learned anything other than an appreciation of how fortunate I was not to have been injured or killed.
Flight 405 took off from LaGuardia's runway 13, a runway that's seen its fair share of accidents. Several incidents of planes skidding due to weather conditions have been recorded before and after US Air 405. Some aviation specialists say it comes down to the geography of the runway, while others allege the runway may be too short in distance. The FAA has said runway 13 fulfills aviation guidelines. But in the wake of the disaster, the agency did decide to tackle de-icing regulations that have saved countless lives. In the months after the crash, the FAA met with members of the aviation community. Their goal, to implement safer de-icing protocols before the following winter.
I think there's no doubt that Flight 405 had a direct effect on how the industry approaches de-icing and the serious threat that it presents. Not only the procedures, but just the mindset.
De-icing procedures back then consisted of different kinds of de-icing agents.
Type 1 and Type 2. De-icing fluid 1 was really just for de-icing, just to remove ice or snow or anything that had built up on the aircraft or its wings. De-icing fluid Type 2 had a little bit more anti-icing agent to it. It allowed for something that we call holdover time, which is a period that it would stay on the wing and reliably prevent ice from building up on the wing.
At the time, several airports, including LaGuardia, did not allow Type 2 de-icing fluid, which proved to be a key factor in that fatal crash.
LaGuardia didn't allow Type 2 fluid to be used because the viscosity of the fluid, when it would come off of the wing, would then fall onto the runway, and there was concerns about creating some traction issues for aircraft landing behind it.
Phil Durner, a former commercial pilot himself, feels confident in the more effective and longer-lasting combination of de-icing agents that airlines have been using.
Type 1, still that de-icing agent, and Type 4, which is an anti-icing agent. And that Type 4 fluid has a longer holdover time. Type 4 fluid, it'll sit on the wing and it comes off of the wing when the aircraft exceeds 100 knots. And then by the time they're taking off, they would have a nice clean wing to operate with.
For Cleveland-based attorney Jamie Leibovitz, who represented several families of US Air 405, the tragedy could have been prevented had the right tools been used, despite flight delays.
Had this airplane been properly de-iced with the appropriate state-of-the-art de-icing fluid, there would have been enough protection so that even while sitting on the taxiway waiting to take off, for takeoff clearance, the ice and the snow never would have accumulated because 2 hours of protection is more than enough time.
Although aviation accidents have dramatically decreased in the last 3 decades, the memory of this tragedy was impressed onto a younger Phil Durner. His home, his apartment, his bedroom overlooked LaGuardia Airport.
I couldn't see the crash site itself. I could see a lot of the airport, as always, but I could see a lot of emergency vehicles. It's difficult to understand the magnitude and the chaos that was going on just a couple thousand feet away from me. I always liked airplanes. I was at those windows watching airplanes all the time.
A moment in time that would forge his career in aviation.
I always think back to that night, and I always have made decisions in aviation knowing that the decisions I make can have a very high cost. So we're sitting now at this pinnacle of aviation safety. It's not perfect, but it's the best that it's ever been. And we take these lessons and we remember the sacrifices and the very high costs of them, and we make sure that those people haven't died in vain.
Sacrifices that Deborah knows all too well. Her beloved Cyrus continues to live in her memory, in her dreams, despite the ever-present grief.
I miss him. I still miss him. It's been all these years, but the grief isn't over. It just changes. It morphs into something comfortable, but it's still there.
For other survivors like Bart, the different scenarios that he played in his mind in the days after the crash also remain with him.
One of the things that bothered me the most in the days after that crash was the thought that my family could have been with me. The fact that I was alone truly was I thought about that because, we flew a lot together. That really disturbed me when I thought about what could have happened if we'd all been together, but we were not, so.
He doesn't miss a chance to reflect on his second chance every passing anniversary.
The only time I really think about it is on March 22nd. But I'm glad I kept it because it's another reminder of how lucky I was to be here.
On the 31st anniversary, the survivors and the families affected agree. It feels like yesterday. The hardships of that cold spring day have not left them. A story of a failed takeoff, but one that's left them grounded in a true appreciation for life.